All right, I want to welcome everybody to this week's episode of the strange and unexplained phenomena of the South Mountains of North Carolina. I am your host, Kaiser Rebel. This is episode 9. I have retitled this episode because I can be fickle sometimes, but I retitled it Stalked in the Dark Woods. But before I start this episode, I want to give a shout out to some folks that's really important to me. First of all, my friends over at Bourbon and Badges podcast, incredible group of guys. They're not scared to cover any topic, no matter how controversial. What you see is what you get. It's raw, it's unfiltered. And they've had me on a few times. I watch them on YouTube, but you can catch them on every major platform for podcasts. Secondly, I want to give a shout out to my friend Miss Mary that runs the coolest little country store you'll ever go to. It's called the Squatch Nest, Highway 226 in Rutherford County, North Carolina. Now you'll have to find her on Facebook under the Squatch Nest, and you have to send her a message and make an appointment ahead of time because it's by appointment only. So check out Miss Mary at the Squatch Nest. Now, I want to take your attention back to episode 7, where an elderly friend of mine a couple of years ago relayed to me the story of when he was a kid in the late 50s. Late one night, he got sent down to the barn/tractor shed area by his father. He had a horrifying experience. If you hadn't seen that episode, go watch it. But in the episode, I also explained that he said his grandfather and his father had told him later of some incidents and experiences they had had. Well, tonight's episode is about an experience that his grandfather and his great uncle, his grandfather's brother, an experience that they had. Matter of fact, it was the first experience that his grandfather ever spoke of to my friend. The year was late 1916, early 1917. He said his grandfather was able to confidently mark that as the time frame for this incident because he said it was the winter prior to the United States being involved in World War I. So that would make it winter of 1916 or early in 1917. Now, they lived on the same farm that my friend grew up on. That farm's been in that family for a number of generations. Well, back then in 1916, early 1917, the grandfather and his brother had scouted an area into the interior of the South Mountains that they determined would be a good area for rabbit hunting and trapping. It was a creek bottom area, but up on high ground, there was an open field and there was an old homestead there. And it was a small subsistence farm, apparently, but it was abandoned, a cabin, a small barn, a spring house, chicken coop, covered pig pen, but they had to secure permission. Now, there's the ethos to this day in areas like this, especially in the mountains and the foothills. If you're going to be on a man's property, you need to talk, or a woman's property, you need to talk with them and secure permission. Trouble was, the man did not live in the immediate area. He lived in town. And back then, town, that might as well be on the other side of the country. They had to wait until their dad had business in that town to go with him to find the man. And the families knew each other and the man knew them, but they had to get his permission. So the day came when the father had to go into town, and they went with him, and they found the man and explained what they were wanting to do. The grandfather said that the man was hesitant at first, but he said, I know you boys, I know you're trustworthy, I know your families. And you can do this. You can hunt and trap the area, but there's some rules you're going to have to abide by. First and foremost, he said, do not sleep in any of the structures located on that old homestead. Now, I stopped my friend when he was telling me this, and I said, do you know why he said that? And sure enough, the man explained to him, he said, that homestead now belongs to the Dark Ones. Now, come to find out, the Dark Ones is just another term for Bigfoot, Nobby, Sasquatch, Booger. Certainly one of the more ominous sounding terms I've ever heard for a cryptid. But he said the area belonged to the Dark Ones now. Secondly, he said if you kill any rabbit in the area, leave some rabbit on the porch of the old cabin. They didn't ask any questions. They agreed, and then began to plan their 2 or 3 night trip into the interior. They asked their father about it. They were teenagers, early teenagers, and the father said that, interestingly enough, that they couldn't take any of the hunting dogs and they couldn't take a mule or a donkey as a pack animal because he said they will get away from you and you will lose them. Too many animals has been lost in there. We'll elaborate on that more in a future episode. And he said, you boys are absolutely at no point to be split up, and you're to be not ever to be without your shotgun, and you're to take pistols with you. And they agreed. So the morning came, and they left at sunup for the roughly half day's journey into the interior to get to this area. They arrived in the early afternoon, and they first set up camp in the woods down below this open field. And they had enough daylight left that they decided to go out and do some squirrel hunting, and along the way set some traps. And they did so. They had some pretty successful hunting, and they got back to camp, had a bite to eat, sun went down, and they called it a night. But at some point in the night, the grandfather reported that they were awakened by the sound of what he thought sounded like the sound of a heavy door slamming repeatedly. And that went on for a while, and to be followed by, in his words, according to my friend, he said, all manner of squalling broke out. Now, squalling is just a southern word for hollering and yelling and noise. And that went on into the early hours of the morning and cost them the better part of a good night's sleep. But it finally stopped. And sun up the next morning, they built a fire, and they went out and did some squirrel hunting. And they went out and came back, ate some breakfast, and they started checking their traps. And they found that they were very successful, and that they had done very well in the trapping. And they reset some of the traps, but also they decided to relocate some of the traps on the higher ground in the periphery around that open field where the old homestead was. They took the traps up there, and along the way they did some rabbit hunting and was fairly successful at that too. They had plenty of daylight left, so they decided to investigate the buildings, the old structures there at the old homestead. And the grandfather remarked that the cabin door was open, and that there appeared to be some kind of a nest in there, that there were small branches, pine boughs, leaves, and that type of thing kind of shoved up over into the corner of the cabin, and that there was a bit of an odd smell, but my friend said he didn't elaborate, the best of his knowledge, best of his memory. And they never went past the threshold of the cabin. I don't expect I would have either. But as they turned around and was getting ready to start heading back to camp from the wood line, from the woods on the periphery of this open field, the grandfather said, and this is the oddest vocalization I've ever heard described. He said that it sounded like something in the woods in a deep, gravelly voice was saying, hob, hob, and would grunt. Hob, hob, and would grunt. And that it stopped. And they headed on back to camp, I'm sure discussing what in the world could that noise have been. And they got back to camp and ate some supper. And before the sun was even down, it all started. More of this slamming sound. I wonder if that was wood knocks. I don't know. I hypothesize. But the howling, he described howling and whooping, and it was closer and closer and closer, it seemed. Finally, to the point that in the near distance, they could hear from multiple directions the sound of things running in the woods. And the grandfather said it just sounded like somebody was running through the woods, but in several places around him. And that they would stop, and more of the yelling would continue, and that they even heard more of this weird sounding hub with the grunts. And it was getting closer and closer and closer to them. The sun was almost down. They didn't know what to do. We're going to pick up from here in part 2. I appreciate all of you. I'll see you then.